Hello and welcome to True Common Ground. This is Citizen Joe Serino, and we have a special guest with us today. We've been talking to a lot of different people over the past weeks, Dr. Chuck and Don Elliker and a few others, but we haven't spoken to anyone from a very important cohort yet. We're in a situation this go around where everybody and everything counts, and so we thought it would be very important for us to start talking with different cohorts, people that we may not have spoken to yet. And one of those is the Gen Z cohort. Gen Z will represent about 10% of the voting bloc. Without that 10%, given the closeness of the races that are going to be coming up, Donald Trump could win the election and retake the White House, and God only knows what's going to happen after that. And that's not the only problem, if we don't find unity with these very important groups, because just in a very little while, maybe 1 or 2 years, Gen Z will be a larger voting bloc than mine in 1 or 2 years. Possibly by the end of this year, there'll be a larger voting bloc. So things are going to change quickly, very, very much quickly. So it's very important, since my voting bloc is starting to move into the wings, that we set a decent place, center stage, for Millennials and Gen Z, because this is their show from now on. That's the way it's going to be. So hearing what they had to say, what their concerns are, the way they see things, I think is very important right now, and we should listen. We should listen and hear what they have to say. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring in Mr. Max Von der Horst. And you're online. You're there. How you doing, Max?
Hello. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thank you for doing this today, first of all. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Let me just talk a little bit about you. You're solid in the middle of Gen Z. I think Gen Z is a generation that runs from 12 years of age to 27 years of age, and you're 23, or born in 2001 or 2000?
2000 I was born, so I'm about to turn 24 pretty soon. So
you was a millennial baby. You was a K2 baby. Well, that's very that was a very interesting time. We all thought that when the clocks changed to 2000, that the world was going to fall off the edge of a cliff. People were saying things like, planes are going to crash. No, seriously, they're just going to drop out of the sky. Everyone's going to die. But
yes, a lot of the end of the world talk. We love that.
Oh, it was really something. But that's
defining characteristic of our generation.
Yeah. It was so crazy. And a lot of people. I worked for not for Nabisco, but I worked as a contractor for Nabisco at the time, and Novartis, and they were like bringing in busloads of these programmers and everything, thinking everything was going to explode, and really spending enormous amounts of money, and nothing happened at all. It just went click and went on to the next date, and that was the end of that. So, but it was kind of funny to see the whole world kind of fall over their feet and screw up like that. It was heartening. If you've ever screwed up yourself, as I have many times, it felt good to know that everyone else can do the same thing. So there you go. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You went to college where?
Well, I graduated from USC Film School with a major in film and TV production and a minor in screenwriting. But that doesn't define the full educational background that I would have. I've studied a lot in terms of human psychology and mysticism and politics as much as I possibly can. And that has informed a lot of sort of the narratives that I like to take on and perspectives that I have about the world. And ultimately bringing us in a greater connection with both ourselves as human beings and beings as part of nature. And that comes into the whole mysticism element of where my background lies.
I see, when I was 23, I wasn't thinking that deeply. I was thinking, can I buy this Falcon that I saw, this Ford Falcon in the lot of a gas station near my house? to be perfectly honest, I did not have the opportunity to go to college. So I had to do my educating on my own. And it worked out pretty well. Pretty
Yeah, it
well.
seems like you made a good life for yourself.
I
I
tried.
would say
Yeah.
it's not fully necessary.
But I have to be honest with you. I would have wanted a broader vision of the world, of myself, my place in it, what I might be able to do to leave the place better than I found it. I think about that a lot sometimes. I wish that I had the opportunity to go to college. I did go to some night school, and it was wonderful. Rutgers at night, but that only lasted about a year, and then we had to pay bills and work and things like that. And my dad had some troubles with his business failing, and it was a very tumultuous time in the late 60s and into the early 70s. So you do what you got to do. That's the main thing. But I'm fascinated at what some of the lines of study and courses that you took. You said mysticism. That sounds really interesting.
Yes, yeah. I took I wanted to take the folklore minor in college, but I only took a few classes. But I've been sort of like on this path of studying mysticism and somewhat of, I don't want to say the occult because that has a bit of a connotation to it, but mythology, I think, is something that I think has been hugely important in my life because I go by the Jungian perspective, like the psychology and philosophy of Carl Jung,
Mm-hmm.
which influenced people like Joseph Campbell, which we get our modern conceptions of what narrative is from him.
Yes.
And so the idea of nature working in these sort of cycles and our narratives and stories that we tell working in these archetypal. Oh my God, my cat is freaking out. 1 second.
That's okay. Bring him in here or her in here.
Jester.
Throw that cat a bone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll restart that so we can
That's okay.
more clear through line. I just didn't want that to be an audio issue. Yeah, so I've been kind of studying mysticism and philosophy ever since, middle school, really. But I really got into it when I got studying Carl Jung's philosophy, and his philosophy influenced people like the likes of Joseph Campbell and all sorts of other mystics that existed throughout the 20th century. But his idea of mythology being a foundational element to the way that humans in general see the world, like everybody has their own mythology, so to speak.
Yes.
And regardless, so it's just like the foundations that shape your outlook on life. And so that's kind of given me this perspective of trying to study all forms of mythology to sort of see the range of human experience and how that can be perceived through psychology, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gotten me into things like Gestalt therapy, which has foundational elements of what figure and ground is. Ground being the basis of your experience, and figure being what manifests in front of that experience. So like we could all be looking at the same painting, but because of our ground, the figures that we see in front of us, if there's a cat coming.
That's all right.
The figures that we see in front of us are shaped by the perspectives that we have, which I think I'm super interested in now because of the way that things like social media work, in the sense of like being mirrored reflections of the ground that we have to give us certain figures. So like the algorithm effect, so to speak, like if we have this bias of people that we follow or things that we like on social media, then they'll come back to us and re-feed that mythology that we have. And so I think that has kind of been an important perspective that I've had, especially also studying media and film and seeing sort of the propaganda that is shown through rhetoric and words, all those motives. And so seeing how psychology is shaped and reinforced by things like media as a reflection of a personal or collective consciousness is hugely valuable, I think, to me in terms of having those two backgrounds side by side.
It's interesting that you say that, and especially with your background, having studied film and writing and things like that. It's so different today, and it's so hard, I think, to be focused from that which is within, because there's such an abundance of stimuli coming from outside of you. I used to say it, when the internet really started to run at top speed, it's kind of like trying to take a shot glass of water out of a fire hydrant. It's overwhelming. And to some degree, you look at like social media and just the posture that has changed. We're like this all the time. We've got, our
I
phones.
think about this a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
We're
gonna have like the bumps on our neck that like are as a
yes.
result of us like looking down. Like I write in my journal all the time. It's like, oh, I'm seeing people with their heads down, people with their heads down. Like there's literally a movie called Don't Look Up that's kind of exactly about that.
It's a great movie, by the way. Scary, but very, very, I like movies like that because they really force you to think about things you have to start thinking about. And then hopefully you can make more informed decisions based upon those experiences. But, so documentaries, movies, very important, the work that you do. But I'm very curious as to how it has been changed or shifted because of all of this rewiring of our brains in a way, because of the way that we're fed this information constantly. We talk about doom scrolling. We talk about falling into the rabbit hole of the internet. The other day, my son said, I started looking at something and it was like 10:45 in the morning and all of a sudden it was 5 o'clock. And you wonder how much of that you can handle on a daily basis before you really start to think differently, and maybe not in as pure or as focused or as legitimate a way as you need to in order to make informed decisions and to move forward. Do you find that there's more, do you feel more insulated and separated from people, or do you feel that it helps you to connect in a way?
That's an interesting question because it's like almost yes to both. Because like in one case, you're connected to literally the entire world at the touch of a button.
Yeah.
And so you have the potential to be more informed and connected to global events or even like small communities that you have niches in, like say a Reddit community or like a Facebook group or something like that, none of which I'm part of, but people are part of those. But at the same time, it's like with this abundance of people and things that you're exposed to, the like actual lasting feeling or meaningfulness behind those relationships are somewhat hollowed. And I think a lot of people are feeling that, especially now, especially after COVID too, because like people only had that means to communicate after a while, because they could only use social media to communicate with their friends, and it felt a little bit, despite the fact that they needed to latch onto each other, they're like, there's something to be said about in-person relationships.
Sure,
And
sure.
I think there is certainly like a push for our generation to want to reignite those because we are aware that that's happening. But at the same time, like it seems like even in-person relationships, like a lot of people still go on their phones while you're in the presence of one another.
Yep.
And it feels like there is this lack of really like ability to connect on deep levels with people. I try like extra hard to try and make sure that is like that's happening when I'm in the presence of another person. But I've noticed like a lot of people that I see, like just like, and like not even just like that I observe, because I don't want to sound like a voyeur, but like other people that I talk to even mention that they don't really know how to talk to people anymore. Like they don't know how to get onto like a deep level with someone, and conversation sort of skates this superficial. And but then also like we tend to be talking about all the same things. Like I have the same conversations with a lot of people, both in good ways and bad ways. I mean, because we all are through social media exposed to a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
And so we're all sort of caught in this feedback loop. And like I hate to sound like a social critic, but it's like the lack of originality, I feel like, in people. Like people feel even in themselves hollowed out, as if they don't know who they are. Like it creates this disconnection from who one truly is, like you were saying, like on the inside. And that's like the importance of like this sort of having a more psycho-spiritual outlook on life to be able to actually figure out how to connect back with the deeper parts of our souls and like the natural world around us and the connections with other humans and living beings that we have, because we're just like this all the
Yeah,
time
yeah.
and like caught in this trance state,
And therapists will tell you, that there's a great benefit, health benefit, psychological benefit to doing this, to talking with someone, to actually exchanging ideas. To your point, I'm at a restaurant the other night, and just for the hell of it, I kind of looked around, table to table. Everyone has their phone sitting right next to them, almost like a security blanket. It's right there, not in their pockets, not turned off. It's there and it's live. And if it moves and they see a flicker in their eye, they look down right away and they pick it up. Or if you're crazy like me and you have an Apple Watch, you get a little buzz on your wrist, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, I've got it. And of course, we don't have to check that, but that's what we've been kind of trained to do. And there's a whole piece of psychoanalysis that's been done on this, likes and things like that. That actually,
reinforcements.
Yeah, it's a little shot of dopamine when you get that like, that acceptance, that blessing from somebody, especially if it's somebody that you care about or somebody.
Like validation for who we are, but at the same time, it's like distant.
Yes, exactly. But it's very addictive. It's very addictive, and that's where I think the wiring starts to change. And I've noticed, like, as soon as when Twitter first came out, and now it's X, of course, and who the hell knows whether it's going to exist.
X, formerly known as Twitter.
Yes, X, formerly known as Twitter. But when it first came out, it was 140 characters. And I never used it because I thought, oh, wait a minute, how the hell can you communicate anything effectively in 140 characters? I get it. You go back and forth or whatever, but people were making bold statements that were completely unsupported by fact or anything else, a lot of emotion. And all of a sudden I started to see this thing, Twitter, becoming this kind of hellscape, anger, viciousness, retribution, well, I'll fix them, and they start pounding out another message, and we'll tell the whole world what we think of this and think of that. And this carried over then to texting. It carried over to emails. I had an interesting situation one time in my place of work. When I worked at Nabisco, I was the director of communications for a while. And there were these two excellent employees, and they were bright, excellent, intelligent people, and two women, and they were having a war in email, back and forth, really just hacking away at each other in a very sarcastic manner. Well, if you did this, and well, I already sent this to you, obviously you haven't read it, and it's going back and forth. And all of a sudden they're copying more and more people because they want to express their anger to a wider variety of people on the floor. Mm-hmm. These two women, these two professionals, and again, I must stress, they were really sharp people, really smart, which just shows you this has nothing to do with your level of intelligence. It's something that we all have to deal with. These two women were 3 cubicles apart on the same side of the building. That means you walk out of the cubicle, you turn right, you take about 15 steps, and that's where the other woman's office was. Mm-hmm. And yet they were going back and forth and having this battle. So I said to him, listen, I'd like to talk to both of you together. Obviously, we're getting to a place here that's somewhat inappropriate, not necessarily professional, and it's reflecting poorly on both of you, and it shouldn't be because you're both outstanding employees and you're both great at what you do. So let's get together and talk. Tomorrow morning, 9:00. Yeah, we're gonna look at each other and talk to each other. So tomorrow morning comes. I said, let's meet at 9:00 in conference room, whatever. And we go into the conference room, and I did a little bit of homework before they got there. I printed out all of their emails. and I put a stack in front of employee
And there
A
was
and a stack in front of employee B. I said, okay, you wrote the first email, so why don't you read the first email? Read it to her right there, and then you respond. Just keep reading your emails. Just look right at each other and read your emails. Let's see how it goes. Right away, very uncomfortable and that kind of, well, Joe, what we were trying to, no, let's just, come on, go, humor me. Just go ahead, read it. All right. Now, so-and-so, if you wouldn't mind, just read your response. At this point, they're really having a tough time and they're getting emotional, okay, which is not what I wanted, but it's really tough for them to do this. And I said, can you understand, and you've copied a lot of people in these emails, can you understand how destructive this is? You have a frustration. You have every right to air it. You need to speak to this person. You need to respond in a respectful and an appropriate way. You would never talk to each other this way. If you can't say it across a desk this way, eye to eye, mind to mind, heart to heart, then don't say it. You can't say it. Then there's something wrong. Get up, walk over to the other one, or there's a new invention. It's called a telephone. You pick it up and you can call, you can actually talk to somebody.
Even that is like a step above the anonymity of a text.
Yes.
Like, you have a human voice on the other end, and it's like a live interaction that you don't have to breed on your response and like let it fester before you're like, yes, this is how I can kill them.
Right.
With word.
And you know that there are things that if you put a comma in the wrong place or a word, when you read a text, it sounds and feels very different than when it's spoken. You can read somebody immediately. You can tell if they're stressed or if they're concerned or if they really need to make a connection right now. And you cannot do that in an email. It can't be done. It's impossible, So it takes a while to learn a new modality, a new method of interacting. And you got to kind of be open to that and realize, maybe this isn't the best way of doing it. And that kind of a thing. So
we're already we have the foundation of that being the norm of our means of communication. But like you were saying, it's a very ineffective way to communicate in a lot of ways because you don't have that person-to-person interaction that leads to the empathy that is necessary for interactions like that.
Exactly.
And then also, like you were saying, with when you're reading a text and you're the one reading it, it's your projections come into play because you don't have the emotion behind that text. You have the words and you have what it's there, but all you have is your own self to interpret that. And that's sort of what I was coming to with the Gestalt therapy stuff and figure and ground. It's like, what do you see in that text when it's only like a symbol more than it is like the full picture?
Yeah.
You can project your own thoughts onto it where it's like, oh, reading into some like comma or period that sounds aggressive. Like, are you aggressive when you put a period after that K?
Right.
You're like, what are you trying to say? Or were you just busy and only could write K, instead of a full sentence? It's really dangerous, especially when it gets into the realm of like bullying too, with the anonymity behind a Facebook profile or Instagram profile and like making fun of somebody online. It's
oh yeah, that's when bullying starts. Another crazy thing happened. I can remember the A key on your keyboard is right next to the cap lock. Okay. So I'm typing away and I hit the word A for the article and then I keep typing and I've gone just a little too far with my fat fingers and I'm hitting the cap lock and everything else, is capitalized and I just hit send. And 3 minutes later, the guy walks in, "What are you shouting at me for?" I said, "Whoa, what are you talking about? I'm not shouting at anybody." "Yes, you are. Look at this." I'm like, oh my God, is this the way, this is where we are? Capital letters mean that I was shouting to you. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so those are just small examples. And I feel like your generation is in a very, they're very well positioned to have gotten this by now and maybe hopefully gotten past it. I did a little research about Gen Z overall. Millennials, 31% of the electorate. Gen Z, 20.3% of the population, 10% of the electorate. But Gen Z is America's most diverse generation ever. The most diverse, which is wonderful. And hopefully that means that they're more open and tolerant and accessible. But they say that a collision of political, economic, and social trends. These are different surveys and papers that have been written on surveys done across college campuses, and just people of.
Like diverse, what do you mean? Like diverse in terms of like philosophically, politically, ethnically?
I would say across all of those, ethnically, definitely, okay, but also philosophically, they a collision of political, economic, and social trends has created a generation struggling to cope with the present and feeling uncertain about the future. Just 44% of Gen Zers say they feel prepared for the future. Current research shows a generation that has, that having been said, has also avoided, teen pitfalls. The much lower percentage of teen pregnancy in Gen Zers, lower rates of alcohol use. However, they're grappling with alarming rates of loneliness and depression and thoughts of a matter of great concern. That having been said, there are positives. Despite their anxieties, Gen Zers are heavily involved in social and political activism. They're less emotionally repressed than past generations. They're showing up with superior intelligence. I can see that just from this conversation. Next generation tolerance. A real ability to stay true to their values, all of which, by the way, provide the best foundation possible for a better future, not just for yourselves, but for the country and everything else. And then it even said, in this one report, that such characteristics combined can activate a great positive change in the world. Gen Z largely entered the workforce when remote and hybrid work went into mainstream. So they're comfortable with hybrid work, which can be much more productive, we have learned now, than being stuck in an office all day long. Are you working hybrid? Pardon me?
Yeah, I am actually. I work Thursdays and Fridays. I work from home, and it is the best thing ever, honestly, because you're not in a building that you don't really feel spiritually connected to. I mean, at least me.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in a somewhat stale feeling environment for 8 to 9 or more hours in a day, and then you go home and like you're stuck in traffic because I live in LA,
Mm-hmm.
and you get home and then you're kind of tired, and then you have to like make dinner, and then by the end of it, you're like, I have no room for myself in this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's not a new struggle. I mean, a 9 to 5 has existed for quite a while. But the fact that we're kind of pushing consciousness and our structures away from the necessity to be in the office all the time is great. And I think hybrid is actually a better version than fully online, at least in my opinion, because like you're connected in that physical way with the people that you work with, but then also have time that you can sort of be a little bit more free with the way that you structure your day, and you don't feel like there's a corporate entity like looking over your shoulder at every moment, and that actually leads to a higher positivity and rates in terms of how you feel about your job itself and what you're doing. You don't feel watched like a hawk. You don't feel like you just feel like you have more control, basically. And I think that that's hugely important in empowering the
Absolutely.
individual in terms of feeling like they have some semblance of agency in their lives. And I think that that is a huge thought that Gen Zers and millennials and people in general, I feel like, kind
Mm-hmm.
of are coming towards recognizing is that, and this is even kind of one of my main goals in terms of the art that I want to make, is finding ways to reinvigorate people's sense of individual power. Because we have such incredibly complex systems in play that lead us so far away from what human nature actually entails and should encompass.
Mm.
And for me, what power really is comes down to being able to have control and over your, time. Time is hugely important, which, So the basic necessities of life are food, shelter, water, community.
Yep.
I think that that is all we really need. And I think that even in the way that towns and cities are structured, make people turn away from their neighbors. And like, this is the first house right now that I've ever lived in where I actually know my neighbors,
Mm.
which is a very profound thing. Because if
Yeah,
you live in an apartment building, like you could live in an apartment building with hundreds of people living in there, you don't even know the person next to you.
that's
So if you're
true.
having like a heart attack and you live alone, like how isolated that you would feel. I mean, there's statistics that show that if you are in walking distance from a friend, you are exponentially like more likely to have like, better mental health. And just in the way that a 9 to 5 job like takes you away from your friends because it takes up such a giant chunk of your time. I mean, I had it's still up there, but it's sideways.
Hmm.
I had my calendar up there and I blocked out all the days where I had work, and that was like the majority of the day.
Yeah.
And it made me so depressed because I'm like, this is my life that I'm looking at in calendar form. And I think people, especially after the pandemic, I talked to people since then, and it's actually incredible. It's like it's remarkable how much people are aware that that was actually like despite the tragedy that was attached to it, the way that
Hmm.
everybody's daily structure completely changed,
Changed
and
everything. Changed
it
everything.
changed everything. Like so many people recognized what was important, which was in-person human relationships,
Mhm.
um, as one thing out of
And
many.
we missed it. We missed them. You know, when we couldn't get together and everything, it was hard. I really, for me, it
Mhm.
was terrible. I just, you know, there are weddings and celebrations and birthdays, and you know, we're doing it over Zoom. It's not the same thing. You know. Yeah.
No, yeah. It's like you really need those things, and and ever since COVID, like the amount of conversations I've had with people about just how they're trying to restructure the way that they live their lives and trying to gain this semblance of like how to live in this world that doesn't seem to be aligned with the way that human nature ought to be. Like I long for this. Like, I mean, there's this kind of split that's happening between I feel like our generation, and there's more than these two demographics, but there's like the people that are very like highly like corporatized, like hyper productivity, like go, go, go mentality. And then there's these people that just want like a farm with their friends.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm in the group of wanting a farm with my friends. Like the amount of people that I hear talking about trying to build a commune and finding land that they can like when they're learning about how to grow their own food and doing all these like homesteading methods. There's a huge surge of that right now, more than I've ever seen.
Mhm.
And that attached with this new age like spirituality that's kind of happening that is aligned with the cycles of the seasons, so to speak.
Mhm.
And those the those two things are incredibly important to recognize as happening with our generation. I mean, there was a poll that was done about like asking people what their religion was or if they were religious, but most people said they're not religious, but they're spiritual. So we
Mhm.
have like this new upsurge of people that are the not religious but spiritual
Tremendous
generation.
upsurge of on the spiritual side, and a really precipitous fall of the church going folk. You know, I mean, that just isn't what's happening anymore. It's changing. Yeah, you're right.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do like to think that in terms of spirituality and I mean, religion is separate from spirituality only in the sense of that it's organized
Right,
system and
right.
involves that sort of community. And I don't necessarily think that it's the best to fully turn away from the community aspects of spirituality, but I think uh, particularly in the sense of after COVID, people were, you know, the whole mental health crisis just skyrocketed. One,
Yep.
because of the being taken away from communities, but also and through that you had this inward turning where you had to recognize your I'm trying to figure out how to fully explain this. It's just that people started considering more about like their inner psychology and how they've existed in the world and interact and what their sense of purpose was, what the sort of meaning of life was.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that created this whole turn towards more psycho-spiritual ideas. People are going to more like get therapy more, and
Yes.
which is an incredibly positive turn, I think.
I think so
Uh,
too. I do. It was a major pause. COVID was a major, it did something that nothing else has ever done before. Not bad weather, not, even 9/11. Nothing really ever stopped. We just kept cranking away, trying to find our way.
yeah,
COVID forced us to stop. It forced us to think about the nature of existence, of liberty, of freedom. You mentioned before that you really enjoyed hybrid. Interestingly enough, another one of my little factoids here: 75% of your generation would prefer hybrid. Only 11% want to be fully in person, and only 14% want to be fully remote. So it's really interesting. Again, you've kind of gotten it. You've figured this out. The generation before you, the millennials, haven't quite figured it out yet. They're still, I look at my daughter, who is, she's a group creative manager for an agency in New York, and they went to 100%, working from home office, 100%. Now they do get together from time to time on projects and things like that, and certainly when they're pitching to a new client or whatever. But for the most part, they're working from home. She said, I've never worked as many hours as I do when I work from home because I'm available all the time. And she has
that's good.
clients. She has clients that are on the West Coast. Their meetings end at 9 o'clock at night. 6 o'clock their time, 9 o'clock her time. So she said, I've never worked as much before, but I find it really satisfying to be able to turn around and spend some time with little Oren, somebody that she loves very much, and her husband to be, Todd. They're able to interact in ways that they couldn't possibly if she was in the office all the time. But she misses, I think, being once in a while at the office. The camaraderie, the connection. The other, though, upside, on the other side of the coin, because you don't have to be in the office, she has employees that live in LA, that live on the other side of the country. And, work completely fluidly, no problems at all together. So there's a tremendous amount of benefit from not having to report to an office. I would say that the folks that are involved with commercial real estate are tearing their hair out right now. They don't know exactly what to do because office space has become not nearly as valuable as it used to be. But
Turn
I
it
think,
into housing.
yeah,
That's
yeah, right, exactly. Well, the smart ones are doing that, aren't they? Already you start to see,
as long as they don't hike
conversion.
up prices. That's all.
Well,
Make it affordable.
that's another problem.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
Yeah, very big issue, especially for your generation. Although here again, they said while things are not perfect and great for millennials and Gen Zers right now, if you follow this trend line, they're going to be just fine. They're going to probably earn more in the long term in adjusted dollars than the baby boomers did, especially with some of these landmark huge changes coming with AI and all sorts of other things that's going to start to generate. People always look at it and say, oh my God, it's going to take away all the jobs. It's going to generate millions more jobs. There's going to be all sorts of new things that happen. Yeah, sure. Talking about AI, when it comes to generative AI at school and work, Gen Zers say, bring it on. They're excited about it. They have concerns about, what will happen to work and things like that, but not nearly as much. It says some workers are fearful or ambivalent about ChatGPT and DALL-E, how that will affect jobs. But many college students and newly minted grads can think it can give them a career edge. So they're actually looking to take courses on it and learn as much as they can about it. There's just too much advantage in terms of efficiency and things like that it's going to bring about. How do
Yeah,
you
it's
feel about it?
inevitable if it's already out there. We've opened the Pandora's box. It's
Yeah,
like the internet. It's like already there, like you kind
yeah,
of unfortunately have to embrace it, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. And I have both concerns.
yeah. I mean, every day there's a new portal. Now, Bard just changed to Gemini. Google used to call their AI Bard. Now they call it Gemini, and they're making it much more accessible and available to everybody. Literally in their browser, you can just, give it a query, give it a question, and it'll spit back out in a matter of seconds. I still can't. I find it overwhelmingly frightening to ask it a complex question and within 2 to 3 seconds have 15 bullet points, shot back at me. It's not always correct. It's not always correct.
Yeah. It's like needs a bibliography, I think.
Right. You want to find out, where did this come from? And large language models are not so attuned to that just yet. They're just basically reaching out to everything that they've ever seen or heard or read and just saying, oh, okay, this is what you're looking for. Boom. And
it doesn't have it's not full artificial intelligence where it has like a human critical lens necessarily. It just amalgamates information, averages it, and gives you something.
Right. So there's no vetting. There's no human emotion involved in this. They say, well, in a matter of years, these machines will become self-aware. That's really scary. but to me,
robots, which is fun.
I know. What do you think is most missing right now? What bothers you the most or keeps you awake at night?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
For a second.
Kind of sprang it on you there, didn't I? Just sandwich it right in.
There's definitely a few points that I would have to think about here, and trying to figure out what the biggest one is. I also don't want to sound like I'm holier than thou by saying what I think people need, because people need different things. But
no, that's not holier than thou. That's being aware of those around you and the world around you, which is incredibly important and not hardly enough done in my generation right now. I mean, just take a look at politics right now and take a look at the Congress. You can call it the MAGA Congress. You can call it whatever you want. There are people that are really in trouble right now, and they're not doing anything. They're on a 2-week break while people are dying, So it's good to hear you say that, that's the first thing that comes to mind. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I would say awareness is probably the biggest issue, if that makes sense. And I think that with the access that we have to all the information in the world through social media or AI or whatever, we have this incredible capacity to be open to all of the information available to us in the world, despite the databases that are, blocked by paywalls, which is horrible. But the element of critical thinking is extremely necessary within that sphere. And I do have a fear that a lot of people don't do the necessary fact checking that comes when they scroll by a piece of information that is really, at the end of the day, propaganda. They don't follow money trails. They don't follow what is funding what and how those interests can create sociological dynamics. I
love hearing you say this. I swear to God, Max, I mean it. This is what scares me. Exactly what you're talking about right now. That in the days of Watergate, where every single fact was hammered at 3 and 4 times before it was printed, that's the difference today. It's that fire hydrant of information spraying at us all the time, and nobody's really vetting it or checking it. And to your point, also, it most certainly can be doctored and manipulated and deep faked and all this manner of thing. And yet the number one source of news right now is TikTok for people from millennials down to Gen Z. Because everybody's busy. And here it is, one after another, after another, after another. But
too much to fact check.
Right.
But,
so how do you how do you parse it? How do you? I mean, you're obviously a very intelligent young man, but still, when you read these things, how do you break it down and parse it out and say, well, that doesn't sound real, or this does, or do you have the time to vet?
Yeah. Well, to preface, I mean, just to belabor the point a little bit, I think like ever since, say, like the Trump era started, we've had this like war for what truth is.
Yeah.
And there's so much thrown in our faces that's like untruths that like you can't weed. It's like hard to weed through the truths. And especially with social media and everyone having a voice and opinion on those truths, it's like extremely hard to figure out for yourself like what actually is happening. Um, Honestly, one thing that I try to do when I'm like I basically what I do is I inundate myself with all sides of information. Like I'm following Fox News at the same time I'm following CNN. But at the same time, I'm also aware that they're both funded by BlackRock and Vanguard and CNN State Street as well. But then they're also funded by another corporation. I forget what it was called. But then another corporation which has like shares that, like of BlackRock and Vanguard again. So it's just
Yep.
like these investment banks are hugely involved in a lot of like the media that's put out there.
They most certainly are. Yes, they are.
And so like for me, following money trails has been very beneficial because you can at least see it doesn't tell the whole picture, of course, because they're just people that own shares, but those shares have influence. Um, like it at least gives some form of background as to what the information is supported by. Trying to find also like reading through comments too has been interesting to not only just see the psychological dynamic, of how people are talking about this and reacting to it. That just gives further context as to like what individuals perceive them to be. And then sometimes those can be catalysts to you finding more information because they might drop a thing where it's like, that sounds either really interesting or really crazy. Let me verify that and just see. And then so you find various sources that aren't necessarily the top sources, say like the major news sources.
Right.
But
do you see a lot of vitriol and that kind of a thing in the comments section too?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, like I was really appalled recently by something that CNN put out that was talking about inflation. And it was basically saying like, oh yeah, inflation's high. Shut up. Stop complaining about it. And I'm like, obviously,
right.
This has got some propaganda behind it.
Yes.
Where it's just like, don't look behind the veil. Don't question this economic system that we have. It's fine. It's fine. I know you're struggling, but
everything's
don't worry
okay.
Like it was basically
pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then people nowadays are, because they're exposed to more information and about like what funds what and weird geopolitical meetings like the World Economic Forum or like the Bilderberg meetings, or even when you get into the more conspiratorial sense of like the Bohemian Grove and stuff like that, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a very real organization. They have a summer party for 2 weeks in upstate California in San Francisco, and they go into the woods and they're like just basically kind of like party sort of, but they have all these different like groups of camps where like Ronald Reagan has been there, Neil Armstrong has been there. It used to be a artist commune, but they started inviting billionaires or people to help like fund their weird mystical like theatrical stuff, but then it kind of got overtaken by corporate like individuals, presidential candidates. They literally have the Secret Service lined around it during that 2 weeks, and they have like a big brownstone building in San Francisco, and like basically they have these things called fireside chats in the morning at these camps. And what's his name? George H.W. Bush introduced his son, George W. Bush, at one of these things saying, this is a good candidate. And there's literally a sign in front of it that says, weaving spiders come not here. And that was from the original camp. And so it was like, don't use this as a networking opportunity, but it's a networking opportunity for a lot of people.
Sure.
But
Wow.
anyway, so this stuff leads to a lot of conspiracies. I mean, like Alex Jones, which I do not support
Right.
whatsoever. Alex Jones, he's an absolute asshole. But he he infiltrated this place with a camera and started filming this like ritual that they have, which
Yeah.
is like basically they burn this like fake effigy in front of a giant giant I'm gonna sound crazy here, but they have a giant owl that literally has the voice of Walter Cronkite, and it's like
Really?
they burn, yeah, they burn
Here,
this
not with the
to kind
news.
of be like, this is our giving up our inhibitions basically, and
Hmm.
we're all these sort of elite people that can just lay back and enjoy ourselves in the woods for a little bit.
Hmm.
um, and this is almost like a modern day Dionysia, like the Dionysian ritual for, to honor the god Dionysus, but
Yeah.
uh, in a
See,
more corporate sense, whereas in
I
the
don't
Dionysian,
think you'd have that though if you had better conduits of communication on a regular basis.
yeah, and
I
there's like this veil behind like the decisions that are actually being made, and because like there was the George Carlin had that quote, something about it was he was in the middle of a talk show basically saying like you don't need to have like this giant cabal of people that are like necessarily working behind the scenes that are these elite groups, which
right.
does happen, but like you don't need to have this organized system of controlling the world, which a lot of people, especially in the QAnon sphere, like believe that there's like these elite groups that are working behind the curtain. It's just like people have um vested interests that have like friends, they're friends with other corporate people, other powerful people,
Hmm.
other political individuals, and because they're kind of in these same spaces and have these passive conversations, it's like I think the George Carlin quote that I'm saying thinking about is like the big decisions happen on the golf course. It's like
Yeah.
they're in the same
Yeah.
space, and like these decisions happen not necessarily in an organized meeting, but in something that might just be passive conversation that leads to major decisions. And so it's just the lack of transparency that people have with the larger shapers of the world, essentially,
Hmm.
that leads to a lot of the mistrust, and rightly so, but it
Sure.
leads to a lot of conspiracy theories, which is hugely dangerous.
And
'Cause like that meeting in the woods is not really anything beyond, I feel like, a party. But
right, right. But the reason that things that are conspiratorial grow out of these things is if you don't, if there isn't transparency and you can't see what's going on and it doesn't happen within the foreground as opposed to behind closed doors, you start to create a narrative because you're desperate to make everything make sense. And that's where a lot of conspiracy comes from. And when I first used to hear about QAnon and things like that, I thought, well, this is just madness. These people are crazy, but not really. What they're seeking is logic. It makes sense out of this world. Now, there are nefarious characters like Vladimir Putin and his GRU and people in a building over there that are pumping stuff through social media that leverage that need to make everything sensible and logic. And sadly, a lot of that is misinformation. I used to listen to some of this stuff and just think, my God, what is happening to us? How can anybody believe space lasers and all this other crazy stuff? But you know what? If you don't have the real answers and people keep feeding you these kinds of answers, sooner or later they're going to stick. And that's why. And I would say, kind of wrapping up right now because I don't want to go too long, but this has been a wonderful conversation, and that's why I feel so good when I hear you talking about these things, when I hear your concern about these things, and I see that you can really you can make it very clear, where you think the issues are and the concerns are, and some of the things that we need to do. We've got some pretty big events that are about to take place, and this doesn't happen very often, but right now we're in one of those cycles where the things that happen are going to change everything one way or another. They're going to change everything. We hope to God for the good, for the positive, but we don't know right now. And so this kind of thing, our ability to communicate with one another, interact, hear each other, not just wait for our turn to talk, but hear each other is so important right now. We're going to have to make what will be, without a doubt, the most important decision anyone in this country has ever made. You've heard this before. Oh, this is the most important election in your lifetime and everything. No, this one, November 5th, this year, that is the most important election that will ever take place in this country, because it is on a cliff, and we either go over the cliff or we walk back the other way, and we pick up the pieces and we try to fix things. And good God, there's an awful lot that needs fixing. Starting with the electoral college and voter suppression and gerrymandering and all sorts of other things. But fixing things start with this: communication, talking, just saying what's on your mind, just expressing it and sharing it with other people. So to the extent that we can continue a conversation like this, first of all, you and I personally and with others, I would really like to do that. And beyond that, I would say to people that are listening to this podcast, every once in a while, turn off the scrolls and call somebody up. Better yet, go over there and stand in front of them and shake hands and embrace and have some fun together, and get in the car and go somewhere and have a cup of coffee. Connect, and put the damn phone in your pocket and don't look at it. And believe me,
put it in another room. You don't want the radiation poisoning.
There you go. All right, I'll go along with that. Seriously, we've got to do more of this. We have to do more of this, and we have to leave judgment at the door. Just stop that. Stop judging. Listen, and think about what the person said. And I don't mean think about it within the moment that they say it. Think about it over the next 2 or 3 or 4 days or weeks, and get a sense of other human beings and what their concerns are. One of the biggest problems that the Democratic Party had is they kind of abandoned listening to people. They went on, their little DNC, their little corporate, entity that makes all the decisions, and they just kind of turned away from human beings and their predicaments and their issues. They're trying to come back now. Okay, but it's going to take time. There's a trust factor here that's been lost, and on the Republican side of things, I'm confounded right now. I can't understand where they are. I don't understand. Navalny was a hero, a great man, and he just died, and we know why he died. He was murdered, and nobody is saying anything on that side. Nobody, not a word, nothing. Nobody feels bad that this man who wanted to lead people to higher ground and to a better life has been murdered by a thug. That's what scares me the most, that we seem to be losing our sensitivity to these things. We seem to be getting so numb and so bombarded with information from so many spaces that we're not talking like this anymore. We're not listening. We're just, closing down and saying, no, this is what I believe, and I don't need to hear what anybody else says because I already know the answers. And I'm 72 years old, and I'm still learning every single day. And so staying open and talking, I think, is the most important thing we can do right now. That having been said, thank you so much for this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your voice and your thoughts. And let's do this again. All right? Can we do that?
Absolutely. I very much look forward to that.
All right. Okay. Today was about Gen Z, and I think I'm going to call this one Gen Z is the key, because it really is right now. You guys are taking over, and as well you should. You are. And, we have to pay attention, and we have to make concessions and adjustments ourselves in the boomer generation to make your elevation and your rising to this to the center stage as effective and as productive and as happy as possible. Remember, Jefferson said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He thought it was so important. He wrote that. He wrote that into it. So,
man, we got to have it.
That's important.
Got to bring it back.
Absolutely. All right, man.
We all want to be safe. We all want to be warm. We all want to feel loved. Know the comfort of home. Want our children to grow, learn to make their own sound. Seems to me we all walk on common ground. Common ground, common ground. We all walk on common ground.
We all wanna be strong, fully free and alive. Take just enough chances, stand up tall and with pride. Yes, we all wanna play, have good friends all around. It seems to me we all walk on common ground. Common ground, common ground. We all walk
on common ground. Some conversations aren't easy, and we wonder how we'll turn this mess around. But if we realize and seek to compromise,
under one moon, lift our face to one sun, feel the wetness of rain, seek shelter, everyone. Yearn for rest when we're weary, seek solace when we're down. It seems to me we all walk on common ground.
Some conversations aren't easy,
and we wonder how we'll turn this mess around.
But if we realize and seek to compromise, we can meet on common ground. Common ground. We all walk on common ground. Common ground. Common ground. We all walk. I know that we all walk 1 foot forward. We all walk on common ground.